So far we've talked about the importance of information sharing, the role of XML in those sharing efforts, and seen a little demonstration of a system that does that. Let's talk about current efforts now. And we're going to start with the need for standards. It's really important to have standards for information sharing, and we'll see why in just a minute. Then we'll talk about a couple of data models out there, one being the Juvenile Justice XML data model, the other being the National Information Exchange model, and a new domain that's part of that model. So let's jump right into it. Standards. Why do we need standards? Well, number one, it enhances reliability. If people are all working on a common standard, then we all know what each other is saying. Standards also allow new players to play without everybody else having to change what they're doing and without having to draft new agreements between different individuals or different entities. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you don't have any standards, here's what happens. Suppose, for example, we've got yellow and orange here, and they decide to exchange some information. So they work out some sort of exchange standard between them, and that all works fine. They're sending their information back and forth. But then red and blue decide they want to exchange information between themselves, and they come up with a standard. And guess what? It's going to be different from the standard that orange and yellow came up with, because there's no standard. They're going to have their own. And then later when red and yellow get together and red and orange get together and they all come up with their own standards. So number one, you've got different individuals having to implement different standards. Look at poor red. Poor red has 3 different standards that they have to implement. And that's a pain that wastes resources. And then when green comes into the picture, well, now green has a dilemma. Who does green want to exchange with, and which standard does green want to use? And is green going to have to learn 4 different standards just to play in this community? Without standards, without a set standard, you just don't have much interoperability. Now let's contrast that with when you do have a standard that everybody can build to. Now everybody builds to that particular standard. The standards are all the same, and everybody has to do it once. Instead of red having to implement 3 different exchange standards, red just has to do one, and that same standard can talk with yellow, orange, or blue. Furthermore, when green wants to come and play with the rest of them, well, green only has to implement one standard as well. Green doesn't have to figure out what each of those other 4 are using and implement to each of those other 4. Rather, green can just implement to the one set standard, and from there exchange with everybody. And that's true no matter how many people play with it. No matter how many people come into play in the sandbox, everybody can just work to the same standard. And is that powerful? Yeah, that's how the internet works. Without set standards for the internet just wouldn't work. If you're of the right age, you might remember bulletin board systems. And bulletin board systems were neat, but they were a pain, and they never became a global communication resource because every bulletin board had its own standard. So that's why the internet works. Having standards for electronic communication makes the internet work. So how do you build standards? Well, XML and XML schema help you build standards, but they themselves are not a standard. Think of it as kind of how English works. We have rules for how to build words. Words have syllables, and each syllable has a vowel, and you can follow those and build words that look like English words. Same thing with XML. Use XML to build tags. Now, that doesn't mean that the words you make are going to make sense, but they're going to look like words. And the same with XML. You follow the rules and you're going to have XML tags. The next step is grammar. So we build sentences by putting the words together in different ways. And we have subjects and objects and verbs and adverbs and adjectives and all of those. And we have rules for how those fit together. XML schema is kind of the same way. It provides the grammar for how XML tags are going to fit together. But even so, knowing the rules of grammar and knowing the rules for how to make a word doesn't ensure that I'm going to have any meaning. I could still slap together nonsense words that look like real words and put them together in a grammar that looks like a real sentence and still have it be utterly meaningless. And that's where data models come in. Data models provide the tags and provide the structure using XML and XML schema to let you put together meaningful XML documents. So the data model is a big step in being able to exchange information. It provides the meaning. XML and XML schema are rules for building stuff, but there's no actual meaning built into those. Data models are where you add that meaning. One such data model is the Juvenile Justice XML data model. It's a common set of tags and structural relationships that facilitate information exchange for youth-serving organizations. So it's all about juvenile justice. It's all about juveniles. And the tags reflect that, and the structures and relationships reflect that. Information about people, information about relationships, family associations between people. It's designed around that. It borrows technical structure from the NIEM, the National Information Exchange Model, which we're going to talk about in just a sec. It borrows that technical structure so that it could be melded into the NIEM when the time came. Has the time come? Yes, it has, because that content has also now been integrated into the NIEM in the form of the Children, Youth, and Family Services domain. So that's part of the NIEM. So let's talk a little bit more about the NIEM itself. It's the National Information Exchange Model. It's derived from an older data model called the Global Justice XML data model. Now, Global Justice was all about justice, and specifically it was focused around criminal justice. And it was such a good idea that other federal agencies went, hey, we want a piece of that. So originally we had a joint effort between Department of Justice and DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. And they got together to extend the JJXDM into a national model that could be used for any kind of government exchange between all levels of government, from federal way down to state and local, and indeed not just among those levels, but between those levels, so that you could have a federal agency be able to exchange information with a local entity. A big part of the NIEM is the Children, Youth, and Family Services domain. I mentioned it just 2 slides back. Here's what happened. We had the Juvenile Justice Data Model, which we've talked about previously, and then we had the NIEM. And the NIEM is designed with a core and then several domains. And there's different domains to meet different communities of interest. So there's a domain for justice, and there's a domain for emergency management, and there was a domain for family services. Now, the family services domain and the juvenile justice domain had a wide range of overlap. They had a lot of tags in common, a lot of concepts in common. So what we did was we combined juvenile justice with family services, and that created the CYFS domain, CYFS, for children, youth, and family services. And so now that's a brand spanking new domain for the NIEM, combining everything from juvenile justice and everything from the existing family services domain. This new domain contains all that information from the 2 previous models, but it also includes a dedicated governance committee that meets regularly to help continue development of this particular domain. Don't think of the domain as being just a bunch of tags, a bunch of data, a bunch of computer information. It's also a bunch of people dedicated to improving and continuing to evolve the domain and the NIEM as a whole. Finally, let's point you at a few resources where you can get more information. If you're at all interested in information sharing within the juvenile community, your first stop ought to be the National Juvenile Information Sharing Initiative website. This project funds a lot of different things, including the video you're almost done watching now. You can get to it via the URL shown on screen, or you can scan that barcode with a smartphone to get there in that manner as well. Once you get there, you'll find all sorts of information about information sharing, as well as training materials, videos like this one and others, and other tools, including the online legal search tool, which lets you search for juvenile-related laws and regulations online, as well as the extension wizard, which is a tool to help you use the NIEM and the CYFS domain in an easy and friendly manner. The other places to go are the websites for the NIEM itself, which would be NIEM.gov for the NIEM itself, and the page for the CYFS domain, Children, Youth, and Family Services. You'll see the URL for both on the screen. You'll see the one for CYFS is rather long and unwieldy. Again, we've provided a barcode that you can scan with a smartphone to make it a little less painful instead of typing all that in. But these are the official NIEM.gov sites for the NIEM as a whole and for the CYFS domain. And that about wraps it up. Thanks for your attention.